Tonight, thousands of Syrian migrants start arriving in Canada. But who's greeting them? You'll be shocked. It's December 7th. You're watching The Ezra Levant Show. Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government for why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
Here's what I'm worried about. What if some of the 50,000 Syrian migrants that Canada is taking over the next 13 months, that's the new number announced by Immigration Minister John McCallum, what if they're dangerous? Not just outright terrorists like the ones who shot up San Bernardino and Paris. What if they're just radical, anti-Canada hate mongers who don't share our values and want to import a bit of Syria to Canada? Like these guys. This was a full-out riot in Calgary last summer when a pro-terrorist protest of about 700 people right at Calgary City Hall saw a Jewish family across the street. Dozens of the Muslims, mainly new immigrants, who had been whipped up with anti-Israel slogans and pro-terrorist slogans, broke off from the main Muslim protest, crossed the street in Calgary, and beat up a Jewish family so badly they had to go to hospital. So are we just going to get a lot more of that? That pro-terrorist rally that turned into a riot was organized by this woman, Saima Jamal. She was the protest organizer. It was in support of a Muslim terrorist group called Hamas. Now, Saima Jamal herself, of course, does not engage in terrorism. She did not participate in the riot that beat up the Jews and others on the street. But afterwards, she was pleased as punch about it. On Facebook, she laughed at the riots, laughed at the violence, laughed at the people who were beat up and wrote, "Bah! After today, they would be foolish to show up again in another protest in Calgary as long as they live." So what if the next 50,000 Muslims are like these ones? Violent, thuggish, anti-Semitic, un-Canadian. And what scares me is that Saima Jamal was a key Liberal Party organizer for Justin Trudeau. She helped him. Now he's helping her by bringing so many Muslims to her community. And as for Trudeau himself, he clearly is indiscriminate about what Muslims he takes his support from. I have yet to hear of a Muslim mosque so extreme, so radical that he won't associate with them. In fact, the opposite, he loves going to radical mosques. The more radical, the better, since he knows he'll be the only politician there getting their votes. Now, after Saima Jamal's Facebook comments condoning violence went public, she was stripped of a YMCA Peacemaker Award she had been nominated for. It would have been unseemly to give a peace award to someone laughing at an anti-Semitic pogrom. Anyways, that was a year ago. Take a look at this sweet human interest story, a feel-good story that the CBC broadcast over the weekend. It was local Calgarians preparing to give a warm welcome to Syrian refugees.
Cesar Agudelo and his friends came up with the idea.
We invited people through Facebook on a cold Sunday morning to come and join us at the Peace Bridge and say welcome to the refugees. All these little tidbits that an immigrant, not only refugees, but any immigrant would like to know when they arrive. And we wanted to make it as accessible as possible.
Did you recognize anyone there? The spokesman, the guy talking, was Cesar Agudelo. He's not described in any way by the CBC. He's just some guy on the street. But in fact, he was the federal Liberal Party's campaign manager in a Calgary riding in the last election. And the star of the video, Esfahan Razavi, yeah, her too. She was in charge of Muslim outreach for another Liberal candidate, Darshan King, who actually won. So I'm sure it's just a coincidence that this pro-refugee feel-good story made it on the CBC without any of the Liberal organizers being identified as Liberal organizers. Normally campaign ads are labeled, but look, my beef here isn't about the CBC's failure to inform its audience about what it's reporting as any responsible news organization would. I mean, they didn't disclose that was a Liberal ad. Instead, my concern here is about Saima Jamal. Did you see her there? Take a look. There she is. She's part of this Liberal refugee welcoming committee in Calgary. The same woman who organized the pro-terrorist rally that turned into a riot that she laughed about. She's out there recruiting fresh meat from Syria. Her own personal website shows her organizing Muslim migrants to Calgary. There's pictures of her, and if you scroll down her page, you can see she's working with a group called ICNA, which stands for the Islamic Circle of North America. That's the same radical group that Zunaira Ishaq, the Muslim extremist who sued and won the right to wear her niqab in citizenship court, she worked for ICNA too. Now, they're not a terrorist group, but their parent organization back in Pakistan is. It's called Jamaat-e-Islami, and its military wing is considered a terrorist group in various parts of the world, including in Europe. ICNA Canada is not a terrorist group. In fact, they actually have charity status in Canada. But the fact that they promote the view of the world they share with the Muslim Brotherhood, promoting creeping Sharia law, tells you all you need to know. As I showed you in this video here, Canada has taken in more than 500,000 migrants from Muslim-majority countries in the past 10 years. 500,000 Muslim migrants. We've doubled our Muslim population since 9/11 on purpose, through demographic engineering, by heavying up on Muslim migration. And now we're rushing in 50,000 more from a war zone, a terrorist zone, where background checks normally take 10 months or more. And we're doing it at a breakneck rush. And who will be welcoming them? The extremist group that wants niqabs in court, and the violence-approving organizer who laughed when Muslim men from her rally beat up a Jewish family and sent them to a Calgary hospital. And whose side do you think your Prime Minister is on? Stay with us. More from The Rebel after these words.
The threat from terrorism is real, but we will overcome it. We will destroy ISIL and any other organization that tries to harm us. Our success won't depend on tough talk or abandoning our values or giving in to fear. That's what groups like ISIL are hoping for. Instead, we will prevail by being strong and smart, resilient and relentless, and by drawing upon every aspect of American power.
Well, that was U.S. President Barack Obama making an Oval Office address, only his third time since becoming president. But I'm sorry, it just doesn't ring true to me. There's no new strategy there, no will. I think that both America's friends and enemies alike have sized up this president. He doesn't really mean it. Joining us now from New York is Cliff May of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Cliff, welcome to the program. Nice to see you again.
You too.
Now, what do you make of the Oval Office address by the president? Obviously, being in that setting, he was trying to have a degree of seriousness and gravitas. Did the substance of his speech match the place of his speech?
Well, I don't think it did. I mean, he was trying to, I suppose, reassure people. But what if you listen to the substance of it, and I think you clearly picked that up, he was saying nothing new. He was saying what I'm doing is working out just fine. We need to have patience. I think what he really means is that the problem that we have, and the problem we have, is that a jihad or war is being waged against America and the West. This is something he intends to leave essentially for the next occupant of the Oval Office. He is not going to do it. It may get worse over the course of the next year. He may be able to keep it at a sort of stalemate level as it is now. The occasional attack, as we've had here, we've had in Paris twice in this year. But there is little treatment and certainly no attempt to cure.
You know, I saw a CNN poll that showed 60% of Americans do not have faith in Barack Obama's anti-terrorism plan. Because so many times he said, well, we're working on a strategy. We don't have a strategy. And I think Americans have sort of given up believing that he has a strategy. Yesterday it felt to me like he knew he had to say something, because just literally the day before the terrorist attack in San Bernardino, he was talking about how there was no imminent threat from the Islamic State. Just before the Paris attack, he was saying they were contained. It's famous that he once called the Islamic State a JV team, a junior varsity team, as in not a serious force. It feels like he's the boy who cries wolf. Again and again and again, he either says, we're going to lick them, or they don't even need to be licked. And then the next day, a horrific attack happens. Did anything actually change yesterday? Other than, he did use the phrase Muslim a few times. He did use the phrase terrorism a few times. That's actually new territory for this president. But other than dropping some of his rhetorical euphemisms of the past, did any U.S. policy actually change? Is a single more aircraft or bomb going to be deployed? Is anything new today as opposed to yesterday?
The simple answer is no. And to elaborate a little bit on that, I had the sense from the speech that his advisor said, look, this is the most, we've had other attacks since 9/11. There was Chattanooga early in this year. There was the Boston bombing, Boston Marathon bombing. We've had other attacks, but this was the most lethal since 9/11. His advisors probably said, you really need to go on camera. You need to make a speech. You need to reassure the American people that you know what's going on and that you're in control of the situation and that you have something of a plan to deal with it. He didn't really name the ideology in this speech or his Saturday radio address, which was on the same subject, didn't go quite as far. In both, he seemed to be saying, more than seemed, that the most important thing we can do now is have stricter gun control laws, that this is essentially a gun control problem. He did talk about interpretations of Islam that were intolerant, and suggesting that these are very unusual, but kind of conceding they do exist. Part of the problem with that, Ezra, is that the seats of Islam in the world today would be Mecca on the Sunni side and Tehran on the Shia side. And those are regimes, and the versions of Islam in those two important places are by no means tolerant. They are, I would say, very hateful towards infidels and very intolerant, and I think they are the seeds from which terrorism does grow. If you tell people that infidels are vermin, at a certain point somebody's going to say, then we have to do something about it, and I will. In the case of Iran, Iran sponsors more terrorism than any other regime in the world. That's according to the U.S. State Department. Saudi Arabia is more equivocal, but Wahhabism is the soil in which bin Ladenism grows.
I think there's a disconnect. People see the madness of the Middle East on their televisions. They see the insanity of the Iran regime, the Islamic State's butchery, and now they see it in the streets of San Bernardino. So they see the radicalization. They see it in other countries too, the stabbing in the London subway station, the shooting in Paris. So that's what Americans and Canadians see. But then we hear a US president, and it's the same with Canadian prime ministers, that says, oh, this is a 1% of Muslims at most that are this extreme. Pay no attention to your lying eyes. What happened in San Bernardino was not Islam. What's happening in the Islamic State is not Islamic or a state. At a certain point in time, I don't think you can keep up the ruse anymore. I mean, I started watching last night's State of the Oval Office address by the president, and after a while I thought, who cares anymore? I don't know if he's persuading anyone. He's 7 years into his mandate. I don't think he has anyone who believes him anymore other than those who are just so partisan. I mean, does anyone actually believe that if the US president wanted to destroy the Islamic State, that such a president couldn't do so in a few months of assertion of the US military? I mean, the US military is so awesome. Even without its nuclear forces, it could devastate the Islamic State. I think people sense he's not even serious about it, that Vladimir Putin is more serious about it. What do you say to all that?
Well, for one, I think it's worse than that. For one, I think that about half the country is very much divided. About half the country probably agrees with President Obama. The New York Times, for the first time since 1920, had a front page editorial in response to what happened in San Bernardino. And what they said was that we need gun control. There was not a mention in that editorial, front page, first time since 1920, not a mention of Islamism, of Islam, of the relationship, of ideologies. It was anything, if you will, to the left of where President Obama was. Same thing you'll see in the New Yorker, same thing in almost any progressive publication, so-called, in the United States. And Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, they're pretty close to where President Obama is. So I think we're very split on what it is. The other thing that I found interesting is President Obama keeps talking, and others, about succumbing to radicalization, about falling victim to radical ideologies, as though these ideologies were like a virus, or to which one, if you're not careful, it will capture you, as opposed to a belief system so powerful that, according to the evidence, you had a young couple in San Bernardino, California, who made the decision to leave their 6-month-old baby daughter as an orphan, marking her for life as the daughter of terrorists. That's how significant this belief system is. I don't think somebody just falls victim to it like depression. I think it is something people end up believing in for reasons that we are reluctant, and particularly in this government, reluctant to think about, to explore, and even to debate in a candid way.
Cliff, last question for you. We see on the Republican side candidates being very strong in at least their rhetoric in regards to the Islamic State. Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, these folks are almost outdoing each other, and I think that the Republican base likes it. How about Hillary Clinton? I mean, for years she was the architect of so much of Barack Obama's foreign policy, certainly that of Libya. What has she said lately? Is she keeping no daylight between her and Barack Obama? Where does she stand in terms of fighting the Islamic State? Does she even say the words Muslim terrorism, or does she use euphemisms also?
Let me start by being fair. I also think that that Donald Trump doesn't understand this problem particularly well, and it distresses me since he's the leader on the Republican side. I don't think if you talk to him about Sharia or fatwas or caliphates or imamates, he would know much about it, and he should learn as quickly as he can. As for Hillary, she is staying pretty close to President Obama, and she also there's a certain incoherence. She won't talk about radical Islam, but she's willing to talk about jihadism. I'm glad she uses that word, but if she thinks the word radical Islam might possibly be offensive to moderate Muslims, and that's a separate but important conversation, then why wouldn't jihadism be, since jihad is a pillar of Islam, and it is understood by major parts of the Islamic world as meaning a holy war. Now, the question is whether that holy war needs to be fought, should be fought in the 21st century against Christians, against Jews, and with all kinds of weapons of war. But again, that's getting into something else. The quick answer to your question is Hillary is not very far from President Obama. She thinks gun control is a big part of the solution.
Well, Cliff May, thanks so much for joining us today. I should note for our Canadian viewers, which is most of our viewers, that Barack Obama listed some of what he called America's closest allies. France, he listed the UK. He specifically did not list Canada. No surprise, because Justin Trudeau has announced that Canada is abandoning the combat coalition against the Islamic State. Cliff, thanks for joining us. We look forward to keeping in touch. Folks, stay with us. After the break, we'll go to Alberta to find out about the Alberta NDP's war on private sector farms. It reminds me of the forced collectivization 80 years ago. Think I'm exaggerating? Wait till you hear our next guest. Come right back.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Ezra Levant. One of the subjects we've been following closely is the forced collectivization of Alberta farms. And I know that sounds dramatic, but if you look at Bill 6, it's not really about farm safety, though that is what the province says it's about. In fact, you have to get through the first two major parts of the bill before safety is even mentioned. It's all about banning family members from working, banning neighbors as volunteers, bringing in a 35-hour work week, having overtime, vacation pay, the right to unionize, strikes. Basically, it's an attack on the capitalist farmer class, reminiscent of the attacks on the kulaks, which were the capitalist farmer class in the former Soviet Union 70, 80 years ago. Of course, we don't have the same violence here, and I'm not suggesting that at all, but it's the same despise for these little platoons of natural community, private sector community by big city community organizers. I find it disgraceful. Joining us now via Skype is a man who is helping to lead the charge against the unionization of Alberta Farms. His name is Rick Strankman. He's the Wildrose Party MLA from Drumheller-Stettler, and he joins us now by Skype. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me, Ezra.
Well, it's a pleasure. I want to give our viewers a little bit of a background about you. This isn't your first rodeo, so to speak. You actually served time in jail for violating the oppressive Canadian Wheat Board Act by daring to ship a little bit of your own grain across the border to sell it in the United States without permission from the government. Am I accurate in my facts?
I was one of the ones engaged in the horrible act of civil disobedience regarding the Canadian Wheat Board. Yes, sir, that's correct.
Well, you're one of the reasons we have wheat board freedom today. It's so ironic that you actually spent time in jail for selling your own wheat, and the government of the day today, of course, if you were selling marijuana, that would be just fine, but wheat, God forbid. I mention that because you're a man of principle, not just a politician looking to talk. You've actually paid a personal price. In the end, you were finally pardoned under Stephen Harper for your act of courage and independence. Tell me what lessons you learned from the fight against the Chrétien Liberals that you're now bringing to the fight against the Notley NDP.
Well, thanks for that, Ezra. That's kind of pleasant, the descriptions of what my past history is about. And to the growing number and the increasing volume of the people coming out to these demonstrations, I've always preached civility and respect in the demonstrations going forward, so that the people, the sergeant at arms as such, the sheriffs at the legislature, for example, are aware that this is peaceful, respectful demonstrations coming forward. What I try and preach to others is that there is power in democracy, and that as they come forward in greater and greater numbers, hopefully this government will be respectful of that. It's absolutely critical in a democratic system that be exercised, and to date, these people are following all that. It's an honor to be seen with these folk come forward. They have great consternation of the onerousness and the single direction at present by the Notley government and her imperative mandate of WCB, the Workmen's Compensation Board, upon them. It's openly frustrating that the government will not give options, at least for that small segment of what they want to bring forward.
Our Sheila Gunn Reid has been an outstanding reporter on the subject, traversing the province north, south, east, west, covering these protests. She comes from a farm family. I was touched by one of her reports recently about Hutterites. Now, folks in the rest of Canada might not know what Hutterites are. It's they're German-speaking. They speak English too, of course, but they're like colonies. They're like the Amish, I guess I would describe them, and they farm in a communal way. They're actually, I guess, the true socialists more than the Labour Union NDP. And this law would destroy these Hutterite colonies completely. They're not compatible with concepts like no volunteer labor, no kids helping out, overtime strikes. It's like two different languages completely. At the last moment, the Notley NDP said, well, fine, we'll exempt Hutterite farms. To which the Hutterites said, no, we want to be treated the same as every other farmer. I thought that was very touching. But it shows just how illiterate the NDP is when it comes to farms. Their experts are brought in from Vancouver and Toronto. They don't know anything about farming. There's not a single farmer in the NDP caucus. They truly have no clue other than they like to unionize things. Do I misinterpret things? I'm out here in Toronto, so maybe I got that wrong. Do you think I've sized them up accurately, Rick?
Ezra, you've hit it right on the head. This government is culturally insensitive to the agricultural community. And recently, as recent as Saturday in Bassano, they brought out the point that you just mentioned about the religious sect, the Hutteran Brethren, and they're believed to be family farm members. And there was a good portion of the 300 to 400 people in that room stood up and actually applauded them in a standing ovation for their willingness and wantingness to be part of the rural Canadian agriculture community. And they are actually standing up, the Hutterites are standing up against this form of segregation that the government has brought forward. It's absolutely disgraceful that this government is treating these people in this fashion. And the crowd in Bassano stood up in absolute respect of the Hutterites in their fight against segregation.
I'm so pleased to hear it. And it was the NDP trying to divide people, pit them against each other based on ethnic or cultural lines. I'm so proud that the Hutterites stood in solidarity. Again, they're teaching the NDP what solidarity means. Isn't that ironic? Now, let me get specific for a few minutes. Can you tell me the status of the bill? Has it passed into law, or is it still being debated?
It's, Ezra, it's still in second reading. We have portions of it going into second reading, and then the potentiality of it is to go to committee of the whole. And that's where Wildrose is going to exercise every option that we can to hold this thing back from legislation. And the Premier says that going forward, once we pass the bill, in a condescending tone, she says, well, then we'll work on the regulations. It's openly frustrating, Ezra, that even the Premier does not seem to understand that the regulations are the methodology that the legislation is actually legally enforced. And they're trying to panhandle this off as some sort of a soft sell, soft shoe methodology. It's just openly frustrating. And Wildrose is going to support Albertan farmers and the agriculturalists. And indeed, now we're finding out that a lot of urbanites are starting to realize what this government is trying to soft shoe its way through.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm a city boy, even though I like the country sensibility, and I did grow up west of the city as a kid. I'm a city boy. I'm here in Toronto now. But this offends me not just because I aesthetically and culturally admire farmers and ranchers, but I see it as so inherently purposeless and unfair and unreasonable. It feels malicious. It feels like it's an attack on the freest people in the province, and that's why they're attacking them. I said the other day, Rick, that there's no problem on farms and ranches that this bill solves. The farms and the ranches are the problem in the eyes of the NDP. I got a question for you. One of the things we like to do here at The Rebel is crowdfund to help hire lawyers to fight. Is there a legal angle you can think of? I mean, you fought hard in the courts of law, and you were peacefully, civilly disobedient. Is there any angle like that you can think of? Are there any crusading lawyers that you can think of that might have an interest in fighting outside the legislature?
Well, that's potentially an option. In Bassano, it was brought up that come January of 2016, if the bill is passed, will those who do not sign up for this mandatory legislation be seen to be in violation? And what would the law proceed, or how would the law proceed? A goodly number talked then about the act of civil disobedience of simply not signing up. The government is going to have to come forward with a whole realm of bureaucrats to enforce this legislation. So there may be a form of civil disobedience in the fact that the farmers simply will not comply.
You know, the province has unlimited resources, unlimited lawyers, but I don't know if they would go all the way of handcuffing and arresting dozens, hundreds of farmers. I think even the NDP is not that so bloody-minded, but that may be where the lawyers come in. Were you part of Farmers for Justice? Was that the name of your organization?
Initially, that's what we were, the cap, if you will, or the banner that we strove under, yes. In fact, I was just speaking to one of the members of the Farmers for Justice just the other night, and they're in the process of updating their website.
I went there.
That was a time, and there's a lot of emotions high, and strategy, go forward strategy. In the past, previous cycle in this government that led to a goodly election of Wildrose members, St. Albert lawyer here, property rights lawyer Keith Wilson, was significant in educating a lot of people about the weak parts of the legislation, and that may have to come forward in the days and weeks ahead. If this government is so as I've said, culturally insensitive, or some may say completely tone deaf to what Albertans are trying to tell them.
Well, Rick, I could talk to you all day, but we do have to wrap up. I'm so grateful for what you're doing. I think you should know that a lot of Canadians in the cities, a lot of Canadians outside Alberta care about this because we love the entrepreneurial spirit of farmers and ranchers. We're grateful to that part of our economy and our history. And so please pass on to all the people you meet who might think they're alone. Tell them they're not alone. Tell them that we care and that we've set up a website, SaveAlbertaFarms.ca. I know you guys are fighting too. Before we go, I understand you have a telephone town hall tonight. Now this will air, we'll put this on the website at around 6 p.m. Mountain Time tonight. I understand at 7 p.m. Mountain Time, there will be a way for people to participate by telephone. What's the number they should dial?
I'm sorry I don't have that in front of me right now, Ezra, but we can forward that to you as the day goes on. I'd just like to close, Ezra, with a comment that a prominent radio broadcaster in Alberta said, and I take that to great stock, is, and to your listeners, if you eat, you're involved in agriculture.
Well, then I'm deeply involved in agriculture, Rick. I'm joking around. Listen, it's great to see you. Keep up the fight. We'll be there with you. And we've got to save Alberta farms, and we're going to. Stay with us, folks.
It's an honor, Ezra. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Stay with us, folks. There's more after the break. Your messages.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Time for your feedback. Josh writes, a couple of friends and I wonder a few things about The Rebel and how it works. We're wondering what it is like behind the scenes of The Rebel and how your amazing videos just seem to roll out hourly. How many technical workers are behind the cameras? And how do they get these videos out so fast? More specifically, are the reporters you have across the country working alone or with a team from The Rebel? Great videos, and I love the nightly Ezra Levant Show. Keep it up. Hey, thanks very much for the friendly note. It's a pretty small team. I mean, it's a lot smaller than we had at the Sun News Network. Just for example, at the Sun News Network in the control room for the TV show, there were 6 people. Here we have one and sort of another person helping. So it's a lot smaller team. Our technology is different. For example, we have 3 fixed cameras. It's a small shop. Most of our people are editing videos. We have a small team across the country too. Sheila Gunn-Reid in northern Alberta and around Alberta, Brian Lilly in Ottawa, Gavin McInnes in New York, Chris Wilson out in BC, but it all comes in. I'm glad you like it. It's a bit like air traffic control around here. Anyways, all that matters, though, is what you see on the screen. I'm glad you like it, and I'll pass your kudos onto our team. John writes, I watch all of your videos religiously every night. I like when you have the smaller one-topic videos because I can send these shorter videos to my friends. If I send them a long 40-minute video with 3 topics, they're less likely to watch it because it takes too much of their personal time. To me, you're the most important TV internet news channel available in Canada. I was ill when Sun News went dark, but now you've made Sun better. Ezra, thank you for taking the risk. You are an amazing individual. Well, thank you. You're too kind. Too much flattery here. We got to get some more hate mail in these letters. I take your point about a 40-minute show being less shareable. That is very true. And we're still trying to figure out how we should do it. Right now, my thinking is put the whole show up at night, and then the next morning, unpack, if there was some highlights, unpack the highlights from it, and unpack some of the highlights on the weekend. Remember, our plan is to put the long shows behind a members-only paywall and have more stuff, short stuff, outside the paywall. We're figuring it out, but I take your point. By the way, as you know, this week, Faith Goldie's new show starts, so that's going to be awesome, too. Chris writes on Twitter, to Ezra, irrelevant, I don't often do this, but I'll make an exception. You're an idiot troll. All right, 2 things. First of all, if I'm irrelevant, why are you writing to me? I mean, that sounds like a waste of time. But on a more constructive note, when you call someone you're a troll, it's Y-O-U''re. Look, I'm just trying to help. Folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. You can send me your feedback in a variety of ways. Ezra at TheRebel.media, Facebook us, tweet me on Twitter, or just write your comments underneath the video here, either on the YouTube page or on our website, TheRebel.media. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. Keep fighting for freedom.